This was about a decade ago, when Halloween was still a big thing. I was trick-or-treating with my two friends. I'll call them Alex and Ben, for the sake of their privacy. This was our first year going out alone and not having Alex's parents follow us around. They were a bit controlling, and it always made the whole thing about 20 times less enjoyable. So needless to say, we were all super excited for this year. For our costumes, I dressed up as a creepy clown. Ben was a scarecrow, and Alex wore a white sheet and a pumpkin mask. I guess he was a ghost with a pumpkin head, but I genuinely don't know what he was thinking. Anyway, we started walking at 5, which was pretty late, but our town's trick-or-treat hours were until 9 p.m., so this was common around here. It was actually really fun. Being just the three of us and goofing around running door to door was a great time. But later in the night, I'd say 7:30ish, we noticed these two guys across the street from us had been near us for a while. It kind of looked like they were following us, which was strange because we were constantly turning down different roads and going to random houses. Once we noticed this, we paid more attention and made a few more turns, essentially going in a full circle. And the two guys basically made all the same turns. Still though, it wasn't exactly easy to tell if they were truly following us. They both went up to houses like any other kids, and they were wearing costumes and everything. Although they were bigger than us, for sure, maybe even high schoolers or older. Against our better judgment, Ben and I listened to Alex's suggestion, which was to leave the neighborhood and take a shortcut through the woods to lose them and cross over into the other neighborhood. The only reason we agreed was because the woods had a path going through it that everyone had taken a few times before. Never at night, but at least we were somewhat familiar with the trail and didn't feel like we'd get lost or anything. So we hurried to the path and started walking through the woods. We hoped the two guys didn't see us. As we walked further in, it got way darker, to the point where we could barely see ahead of us. This was well before kids were running around with cell phones, so none of us had any way to light up the path. We had to stop for a second, as it started to get really spooky and kinda dangerous, and we were trying to decide if to turn back. However, while standing there, we started to hear footsteps crunching against the gravel behind us. All we could make out was the outline of two men walking toward us before we all went running into the trees. To make things worse, Ben, who was the last to start running, swore he saw the two men chase after us as soon as we took off. So in the panic, we got completely lost in the woods. And every time we took a break to catch our breaths, we'd only have 10 to 20 seconds before we'd hear footsteps running up behind us and have to take off running again. I think that was what really confirmed to us that not only were we being followed, but they also had to have had something really horrific in mind to be still chasing us through the woods. We must have been lost in there for over half an hour before making it to a street. None of us knew which direction to go from there, so we just guessed and happened to find ourselves in Ben's neighborhood. We went straight to his house and hunkered down inside, glued to the windows for the rest of the night. Of course, being kids, we didn't tell anyone. Alex got picked up around 10, and I spent the night at Ben's house. It's worth mentioning that in the middle of the night, sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., both of us woke up to what we thought were two sets of footsteps walking up the driveway. His room was on the first floor and right at the front of the house, so the sound was pretty clear. By the time we looked, though, we didn't see anyone. Could have been nothing, but both of us having woken up to it makes me unsure. After that, nothing else happened. Every other Halloween was completely normal, but we always got that little adrenaline spike with that nervous feeling that we were being followed. This was 5 years ago on Halloween night. I was lucky enough at the time to have a nice house in one of the larger neighborhoods. Large in terms of a lot of houses, not necessarily big houses. But because of this, tons of kids would be flooding the streets every Halloween. So usually from 3 to 7, I'd be handing out candy full time. Now, nothing ever interesting ever really happened. It would always be the same interactions. Kids would come up and ring the doorbell, say trick or treat, get their candy, and leave. But toward the end of the night, the doorbell rang, and I answered the door to a single girl standing on my porch. She was alone, but there was a guy on the sidewalk, I assumed her parent, watching her. The girl looked a bit strange though. She had on a costume of, I guess, a dead bride. Sort of a ripped up white wedding dress. But she also had white face paint covering her entire face. And oddly, she looked older. Not really like a kid, the more I looked at her. But of course, with the face paint, I thought it might have just made me have trouble determining her age. She didn't smile or say anything, and just held out a small bag. I put a handful of candy in it, and as soon as I did, she turned and quickly walked away. The man walked next to her, and they were talking, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. They definitely knew each other though, and although the whole thing was a bit weird, I wasn't worried about it. I looked around to check if any other kids were coming by, but not seeing anyone, I closed the door. Rest of the night was slow. I had a few more kids come up to the door, but it was mostly over. I moved the candy away from the door and stayed up late, talking on the phone with some friends and cleaning up around the house. Honestly, I think I was up until 1 a.m. When I realized how late it was, I turned off all the lights and went upstairs to shower before bed. I was in there for maybe 15 minutes before I got out and happened to check my phone and noticed an alert from my doorbell camera. It was from 10 minutes ago, basically right after I got in the shower. Sometimes this happens and it was just a false alarm, but when I checked it, I immediately felt my stomach drop. For just a moment in the corner of the video, that same girl with the white wedding dress costume showed up, but immediately backed away, kinda like they remembered there was a camera and was trying to stay out of view. I quickly got dressed and hurried downstairs and looked outside. It was quiet, and nobody was on the porch. My heart started racing. This couldn't be a coincidence. But then I heard something behind me. I turned and stared down the shadow-filled hallway. I could hear whispers coming from the other end of the home. Two people talking back and forth. I instantly turned around, swung open the door, and sprinted out of the house and all the way to the other end of the neighborhood. I then called the police and waited anxiously. Not even a minute later, I got another notification from the doorbell app. My face went pale. The recording showed the girl and the man running out of my house. I gave the police the video evidence, and they did what they could. They found that they'd likely picked the lock on the side entrance door that led inside my garage, which they were then able to get inside the house from. But they never found them, or even identified them. Interestingly, other neighbors reported having similar weird encounters with the two, but they only broke into my house, so the two were probably going around and trying to find someone who they thought would be most vulnerable. Just a theory though. Even to this day, no further information has come out, and the two haven't been seen since. I was 15 and felt too old this year to be going around in a costume trick-or-treating on Halloween. Instead, I hung out with my friend Aiden, kinda just hanging out in my room and being bored. It felt like we should be doing something, because it was Halloween. Not only that, but my parents were gone for a work party in the city, so we had the whole house to ourselves for the rest of the night. After a while, we couldn't decide on anything cool, so we did the most unoriginal thing and went to the basement to watch a Halloween/horror movie. We found something decent and turned it on, then turned off all the lights. The basement was already kind of a spooky place in the house, being unfinished and with boxes and random stuff stored all around. Basically, there was just a couch right in the middle and a small TV in front of it. It was usually where my dad went to have a couple beers and stay up late while everyone else was sleeping. Anyway, we watched the movie for a while, getting past the introduction and whatever. But then we heard a thump. Both of us looked at each other, then paused the movie. The house was quiet. I thought it might have actually been from the movie, so I rewinded it and played it back, but there wasn't anything even close to what we heard. From the basement, everything upstairs sounded muffled, but we were sure it had to be from the floor above us. I got up, and Aiden followed as I went to the bottom of the stairs and listened again. Very quietly, we could hear more thumps. They were softer, moving around the upper floor. Me and Aiden just looked at each other in fear, not moving or talking, knowing exactly what the thumps sounded like. It was like someone quietly walking around upstairs. Then, suddenly, a voice called out. "Aiden! Aiden!" He called out Aiden's name several times. His voice was deep, and Aiden clearly had no idea who it was. And even if he did, they'd still broken into my house while my parents were away. We quickly found a place to hide. It was a very small closet in the corner of the basement. Pretty sure it was the utility closet, with the water heater and stuff. And only seconds later, the basement door creaked open. We could see through the small cracks in the closet. The upstairs lights shined down the stairs into the dark basement, and after a pause, the man started walking down. He walked slowly, getting to the bottom and pausing to look around, then moving into the middle of the basement. When he noticed the TV was on, he stared at it, then called out Aiden's name again. "Aiden!" He began looking behind some of the boxes, and even opened one and searched through it for a minute. I knew that box had old photo albums and family gifts and stuff, so it was super creepy to watch this guy just looking through them. But after being down there for 5-ish minutes, he headed back upstairs. We heard his footsteps wander the upper halls for a while. Then it went quiet. After waiting in the closet for what felt like a whole hour, I finally snuck out, got my phone, and called for help. I'd waited so long, though, that the guy was already gone, and with how dark the basement was, we couldn't see any features of the guy to identify him with. Clearly, though, he knew who Aiden was, and found out he'd be alone at my place for the night, and was definitely stalking him, probably to kidnap him, and maybe even me too. It was an extremely disturbing situation, and I still talk to Aiden to this day, but nothing has ever come from it. We never saw that guy ever again. This happened a few years ago on Halloween. I was still a kid, not super young, but getting to the point where some people in my age group would start deciding to skip out on trick-or-treating. Most of my friends this year chose not to go, but me and my best friend Jason were still excited for it. For me, it wasn't even the act of trick-or-treating that made it fun, but it was just going around the neighborhoods and enjoying the holiday, hanging with friends, and doing something you don't always get to do. And of course, at the end of the night, you'd have a ton of candy that would last for weeks. Jason lived in a slightly larger neighborhood than me, so after school I headed right to his house so we could start from there. Admittedly, we both wore the most generic, boring costumes we could find, because neither of us wanted to look like tryhards and go all out on our costumes. Anyway, we started trick-or-treating around 4. It all started out just as you'd expect. We went door to door and got as much candy as possible, and had fun running around the neighborhood and looking at all the cool decorations. By 6:30, we'd made it well past the neighborhood, and maybe 2 or 3 further down, to a place we hadn't really been to before. It looked like every other area around here, except instead of leading to another neighborhood, at the end there was a road going into the forest, and along that road were these massive houses. At least twice as big as the ones we were walking around, but probably even bigger. They looked like mansions, tucked away in the trees along the road. Both of us knew we had to see what they were handing out. We didn't even finish going up to the rest of the houses where we were at, and just went straight for the bigger ones. Stupidly, we didn't even realize the sun was going down, and honestly, we didn't know where we were before, so going into this even more unknown forest neighborhood was not a good idea. We went up to the first house. It had a long driveway, and the whole mansion only had a single porch light on. I rang the doorbell, but nobody answered. After a minute of waiting, we left and went to the next one. Pretty much right away, we noticed how quiet it was out there. Just the crickets chirping in the trees. No other kids or parents were walking around or trick-or-treating over here. Somehow, we still didn't get the hint, and kept going deeper in, approaching every house along the way. But none of them answered. I think we knocked on 8 to 10 houses, before we saw an orange glow in the woods, and noticed it was a house that finally had some Halloween decorations outside. It looked the same as all the others, being old and extremely large, but it had lights and yard decor all around it. Sort of in an older style that matched the house, but we figured they surely were handing out candy if they went through all the work of setting this up. We couldn't help but get excited as we hurried up the driveway and went to knock on the large wooden door. But once we were up on the porch, we saw the door was already open. The inside of the home was very dark, and everything looked outdated. Still, I knocked on the door. It was very quiet for a whole 30 seconds while we waited. Felt like something was off, because if you had all the decorations and left your door open on Halloween, likely you'd be home and watching the door. It wasn't until we were just about to walk away, when suddenly a man appeared in the crack between the open door. He was an older guy, 50s at least, with thin hair and these really open eyes. It almost didn't look natural. He smiled and said Happy Halloween, and said he had candy just inside for us. There was an awkward pause for a few seconds, because we thought he was going to go back to grab the bowl, but instead he just stepped aside, as if inviting us in. Neither me or Jason moved. "Come on in. It's just down the hallway here. The bowl's too heavy for an old man like me to be walking around with." He opened the door wider and lifted his hand up toward the hallway, again wanting to welcome us inside his home. But common instinct, mixed with the eerie darkness that covered most of his home, we knew this wasn't worth the risk. Jason tried saying some sort of excuse, but stumbled over his words and didn't even get a coherent sentence out before I nudged him, signaling to just leave. We both hurriedly walked away, not even looking back to see the man's reaction. We still didn't know whether or not that man had bad intentions or anything, but we just wanted to be safe and not end up on the news as the kids who willingly went inside some crazy guy's home on Halloween. Being more focused on just getting away though, we unconsciously just kept going down the road the way we were before, heading deeper into this strange neighborhood. We skipped the next several houses though, still talking about what that strange interaction was, and ultimately decided we should get out of this neighborhood and head back to one of the regular ones. Because we were already so far in, though, we thought continuing down would have to lead to a road at some point. We walked for 15 minutes, not stopping at a single house. The woods were just as quiet, and now with the sun fully down, it was extremely dark. Nobody else was out there. And then we saw something up ahead. Along the forested road, there was a car, parked right on the edge. It was so dark outside though, and its lights were off, so by the time we saw it, we were already just 20 or so feet from passing it. It was very old, and with none of its lights on, it nearly resembled an abandoned car. Jason and I walked past it nervously, confused and curious about it, but sticking to the opposite side of the road. I couldn't see anything through the front windshield, with it parked perfectly in the shadows, but as we passed right next to it, and I looked into the side window, I just caught a glimpse of a person sitting in the driver's seat. From that glimpse, I instantly recognized the wide-open, disturbing eyes he had. I told Jason to run, and we both booked it down the road. Almost right when we did, the headlights on the car turned on. We just kept running though, and got super lucky that only a minute down the road was an intersection, leading to a normal neighborhood. We didn't see the car follow us, but maybe us running away made him know that we were aware of everything, and kept him from trying anything. We basically went right back to Jason's house and never told anyone about it, not even the rest of our friend group. That was our last year ever going out trick-or-treating for Halloween.
My very first car was a dark green 2000 Volkswagen. It was the most basic of basics when it came to cars. No options whatsoever except for an automatic transmission. It was $300. Slow, dumpy, had no right headlight, drove straight with the steering wheel practically sideways, and let out a cloud of white smoke when started. Every stereotype of a poor high schooler's car you can think of. My car was no exception. Despite it being a piece of German crap, I loved that car. I drove it every chance I had to. I named it Thunder Bunny. But Volkswagens from that generation, my model especially, had a pretty bad flaw in the automatic transmission. I'm not sure exactly what causes it, but essentially, the transmissions gradually get worse and worse until the car will not shift into third gear. And there's not a thing you can do from there. So a couple of weeks after Halloween 2019, I was going about 30 miles per hour when the engine suddenly roared and the car wouldn't speed up. I feared the worst, and my fears were justified. My dad, a mechanic, didn't even have hope for my car. She was gone already, and so much to my dismay, we started looking for a new car. It only took about a month for us to find it. A dark green 1999 Volkswagen. Exactly like my old car, in absolutely everything. She was faster, had heated leather seats, auto windows, an auto sunroof, everything. All except for an automatic transmission. I knew how to drive manual, so it was perfect. I had a new baby from the crackhead neighbor girl to Scarlett Johansson. At least in my eyes. I loved that car even harder. Gave it another nickname and was happy. Okay, I'm about to get to the story, but I have a few more quick things to explain. You can skip this if you want, but it's important, but I guess not vital to the story. First, for people that might not know, when you have a manual car, you cannot leave it in gear and take your foot off the clutch. If you do, the car will stall, which is bad, so if you do leave your car in gear, you need to turn the engine off before taking your foot off the clutch. If you don't want to turn the car off or have it turn itself off, you need to pull the handbrake or it will roll away. Guess what the only really broken thing on my car was at the point this story takes place? If you guessed the handbrake, you're right. And that was the second thing. No handbrake. Okay, now to the story. I started working as a pizza delivery driver in a smaller growing town in Michigan. It was good money, but once in a while I delivered to an incredibly sketchy place and I've had a few shotguns pulled on me. One night, about 2 months ago, I was delivering on a Friday. Usually Fridays are very busy, but this day was a little slow. So when a delivery came at 8:30, half an hour before we closed, I jumped on it. I realized it was 7.1 miles away, so all of the closing jobs would be done by the time I got back, and I would have been able to leave immediately. It was way out of town in a wood-surrounded neighborhood, but again, no work when I got back to the store. Seemed like a good deal to me. And I'm all about those sorts of deals. So I climbed into my car and went to drive the 7.1 miles away. As I pulled up to the house, I began to get a bad feeling. The house was in a small trailer park neighborhood, next to a lake. The kind where the houses are all a good distance apart with a likely drug problem, and was completely dark. No lights on inside. There was a single car in the driveway and an open window on the side of the house. I pulled in behind the car in the driveway and sat there for a moment. Something was off. By the house being completely dark, I mean there wasn't so much as a night light that I could see. Usually when I deliver to a dark house, there is at least a light on upstairs or something that would signal someone being awake, waiting for their pizza. But the house seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in gear, turned off the engine, grabbed the small cheapest pizza we had, and got out. Without my headlights on, there was nothing. I could barely see the house. The only light was the dim moon. I walked onto the porch and past the big open window to the front door. As I reached the front door, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open, just enough for me to see into the void of the house. Thinking of every single horror movie I've ever seen, I said aloud, "Screw this," and hurried back to my car. I'm a tall, well-built looking guy, but despite my wide shoulders and baggy hoodie, I'm a frail thing and can hardly fight off a small dog. I got into my car and turned on the engine. My headlights illuminated the house, and almost simultaneously, the living room light behind the big open window lit up, and a single guy looked out and walked to the front door. I cursed to myself and weighed my options. If I went up to the door, I could die. If I noped out of there, I would 110% be fired. That meant no new car parts, no gas money, no cute dates with my girl, just sitting at home doing virtual schoolwork. It was a stupid choice, I know, but I grabbed the pizza and opened the door. Making a choice I'm damn glad I made. I took the car out of gear and climbed out. Mostly so my engine would still be running so that if I needed to, I could run back and immediately take off. I walked to the door where the man had opened it the rest of the way. As I got closer, I got a good look at him. I'm not one to judge a person based on their physical appearance, but this guy's head was cleanly shaven and was covered in tattoos. He was wearing a pair of gray jeans and a white tank top. He had a scowl on his face and was staring me dead in the eyes. I looked past him for a moment into the house, which was completely empty. As I got close enough that I started opening the pizza bag, he started to reach around his waist. I stopped. He was staring at me with the most evil grin I've ever seen. I knew in that moment that I was about to die. I had always heard your life seems to flash before your eyes. I thought about my girl, that she wouldn't know what happened. My work would stop delivering upon my disappearance, assuming that my body was never found. My dad would regret telling me he was happy for me landing this job. That's when I heard it. That distinct sound of gravel under tires. My only pathetically small chance of escape was rolling away. I didn't even look back at the car to know that. I just stared at the man and was about to say, "Screw you," when he looked back at my car. I heard the sound of the car rolling. It was getting closer. The guy's eyes went from the driveway to behind me. I finally looked over my shoulder. My car had rolled backwards and had come to a smooth stop near the mailbox of the house. I looked back at the guy, who had a nervous look. He looked back at me and scowled again and took his hand from around his waist. He reached into his front pocket and took out $12 and handed it to me. Gave him the pizza and watched him slam the door shut. I ran back to my car and practically tore the door off trying to get in. I looked back at the house and the man was standing in front of the window, staring out at me. You better believe I nearly spun the tires on my way out of there. I kept glancing at my mirrors until I started driving under streetlights. It was easily the scariest moment I've ever had. As soon as I got back to the store, I told my boss about it and she called the police. We never heard anything about it. I assumed they went to the house and only found a small cheese pizza. I started carrying a knife on me at all times, and my boss is considering getting trackers for our pizza bags. Only recently did I realize this is a sort of butterfly effect. I thought it was the worst thing ever that my transmission went out, and I cursed Volkswagen for designing such a terrible automatic transmission. But if that transmission was still working, then I would have still had that car when this happened. I would have put the car in park, and it would have sat there while whatever would have happened to me happened. I have zero doubts in my mind that the man was planning on murdering me. So, shitty German engineering saved me from getting murdered.
This happened during the last week of October, leading up to Halloween. I lived in a quaint, small house in a very standard suburban town. I definitely enjoyed the holiday, don't get me wrong, but setting up outdoor decorations was never really my thing. A few years ago, my sister gifted me a small ghost decoration, so I just set that up in my front yard and call it a day. But a week before Halloween, I got a knock at the front door. It was my day off, so I was home to answer it. I didn't recognize the man. He was around 40, with stubble and short brown hair, and wearing a thick, puffy jacket. He had a wide smile, as he said he was just wanting to tell me how much he loved my Halloween decorations. I didn't really know how to respond. Again, I only had that single, small ghost in my front yard. It wasn't even that cool or unique. Literally just a sheet of wood with a ghost painted on the front. I said thanks, and the guy kept his smile as he walked away. I found it really weird, but not concerning. Probably just a really social person. Maybe too social, to be honest. However, only a couple days later, he came back. This time, I'd gotten home from work at 7, and without even getting a chance to change out of my work uniform, he knocked on my door. I was actually very creeped out when I saw it was him again, and the conversation only made it a little more concerning. He again complimented the ghost in my yard, but instead of leaving the conversation at that, he then tried to start up small talk. I gave very uninterested one-word answers, making it clear I was not interested in whatever the hell he was trying to get at. I mean, at this point, it was just creepy. Eventually, I told him I was busy, and even then, he still tried to keep me at the door, which forced me to just close the door in his face. He stayed there for 20 seconds, looking like he was contemplating knocking on the door again, but thankfully he chose otherwise, and just walked away. Things were starting to get real creepy with this guy, but I hoped that was the end of it. Several days went by. There were no other occurrences with the man, so it had mostly fled my mind. It was Halloween night, and I'd been lucky enough to get out of work early, so I'd be home to hand out candy. I made a very early dinner, and spent the whole night going back and forth from the TV and the front door. Around 7, most of the crowds had died out, and it was just a few groups of kids coming by every once in a while. But when I opened the door to hand out candy to a few kids, I happened to notice something across from my house. I recognized the thick, puffy jacket and knew it was the same man that had come by twice before. He was standing on the sidewalk, looking almost like he was watching me or my house, but I couldn't tell. It was too dark. I handed out candy to the kids and watched them leave, making sure the guy wasn't following them or anything. Maybe I was oversuspicious, but the man ended up walking the opposite way, so I closed the door and tried not to worry too much. Eventually, all the kids seemed to go home, and the neighborhood streets were quiet and calm, with no kids walking around anymore. I stayed in the living room and turned on a scary movie to end off the night. I think it had to be 10 p.m. when I started it, and probably 11 or 12 when there was a sudden knock at the front door. I nearly fell off the couch by how much it scared me. I got up and cautiously looked out the door, seeing the same man standing there, and he was holding something. It was way too late for this. I immediately knew something was wrong. I didn't open the door, but he must have heard me, because he started talking. "Got something for ya. Nothing special. Just wanted to give it to you to celebrate the holiday." He knocked again. "Hello? It's just a gift. You'll love it." I didn't respond. I dialed 911 and stayed watching outside the door as I got cops on the way. He kept knocking and trying to give me this gift, but I couldn't see what it was. All I could see was a generic box in his hands. After a minute, he ended up leaving, taking the box with him. I gave cops all the info I had, but it wasn't enough for them to find him. And something tells me he was still nearby, watching as I talked outside with the cops, because after that night, he never came back. I don't know what that gift was, or why he was basically stalking me, but every year around Halloween, I get that sinking feeling, knowing he might come back to continue the harassment. I'd gotten home from work at 9:30 this night and made a quick bowl of cereal for dinner, then went right to my room where my gaming setup was to stay up late and game with the boys. They all worked later shifts too, and I guess were running a bit late, so I sat there and finished my food, then started gaming without them while I waited for them to get online. In the middle of a game, my phone started ringing. I checked it, thinking it was one of my friends, but it was just some random number. I let it ring through, but just a few minutes later, my phone rang again, and it was the same number. I actually found this to be really weird, because usually scam calls don't call immediately twice in a row, at least not from the same number. I declined it, but as you could have guessed, they called back right away for a third time. Figured there was no way this was a scam, and had to be a friend using a different phone or something. I picked it up, but didn't say anything at first, waiting for them to speak. But after a few seconds of silence, I said hello. Still, no one responded. I knew it wasn't a dead line though, because I could hear wind in the background. Someone was definitely on the other end of the line. I hung up after 15 seconds, getting kinda creeped out. A few minutes later, my buddies got online, and of course the first thing I asked them was who was messing with me. At first, they pretended like it was them, but they were clearly just joking around, because they actually had no idea what I was talking about. They agreed it did sort of seem like a prank call, but at the same time, what kind of prank is it just to call and not say anything? We left it unknown and just started gaming. Oddly, as soon as I was on call with my buddies, the calls stopped coming in. Couple hours went by, and I'd entirely forgotten it ever even happened. At 2 a.m., we finally decided to call it for the night. We hung up the call, and I stayed at my desk for a minute, when suddenly I felt my phone vibrate. I looked over and saw it was a text. Before even unlocking my phone, I saw the text was from the same number that was calling me, and that it was a picture. I opened my phone and clicked on the image. My stomach tightened, and I could feel the blood rush from my face. It was a picture of me gaming at the desk, taken from right behind me just moments ago. I spun around and looked. No one was there. The only slight relief I got was seeing the window right there, and thinking that at least whatever the hell this picture was, it likely wasn't taken from someone inside my house. I hurried up to the window and looked outside. There wasn't anyone in sight. I made sure the window was locked, then closed the blinds. I went back to my desk, still feeling really unsettled as I stared at the picture still up on my phone. I knew how serious and insanely creepy this was. I saved the image and quickly sent it in the group chat with my friends, praying it was somehow one of them pranking me. But none of them even joked this time. They were all telling me to get out of there or call the cops. I felt my heart start pounding as I quietly opened my bedroom door and looked out into the rest of my home. It was real quiet. For some reason, I really wanted to check the rest of the house and make sure the whole place was secure before calling the police, just in case I was in immediate danger. But I barely even made it down the hallway before looking around the corner and seeing the front door. It was wide open. I don't know how, but somehow it was like I knew that someone was just around the corner from me, and I instantly sprinted back to my room and locked the door. Immediately, footsteps came from down the hallway, but he walked slowly, stepping right up to the other side of the door, and then knocked on it. I saw the door handle move, then he knocked a few more times. He never spoke a word. I started a call with the police, but this whole thing didn't last more than 30 seconds. The man behind the door suddenly backed away, and I'm assuming just left the house. A few officers came by and did their investigation, but I didn't get the answers I hoped for. The number he called and texted with was a burner phone, didn't link to a name or anything, and I never actually saw the man, or had even a single hint as to who it was, or why any of it happened. Even now, I can't help but get paranoid sometimes, because what's stopping him from coming back and doing the same thing again, or something even worse? For Halloween last year, I had plans to go to a party with a bunch of friends. It was supposed to be a house party at a mutual friend's place, but just on the morning of Halloween, the plans fell through. I'd already slept in and woken up super late, having planned to stay up all night at the party. Without it happening, I guess I just had to hang around alone at home. I spent the day as I would any other, and eventually found myself on the couch for the evening. It was well past trick-or-treat hours, and although I wasn't sleepy, I was definitely tired, just from being bored all day. I grabbed a blanket and some snacks, then turned on an old horror movie to pass the time with. The way my living room was set up, my couch was along the wall with the TV in front. To the left was the kitchen, and to the right was the front windows of my house. I almost always kept the curtains closed for privacy, especially at night. But during the movie, several times I thought I'd seen something move between the gap in the curtains. I'd turn my head and look, and there was nothing, so I'd forget about it until it happened again. Finally, after the 5th or 6th time, I actually got up to look. I fully expected not to see anything. I pushed the curtains aside and looked out the window. Right away, I saw someone outside my house. Not right out by the window, like I thought whatever I'd been seeing was. This guy was out in the street in front of my house. He was an adult for sure, maybe in his 30s, but had a dark Halloween costume on. He was just walking around aimlessly, going up to the sidewalk, then turning back around and crossing the street. The way he was acting made it look like he was drunk. I mean, I would have bet good money this guy was walking home from a Halloween party, completely hammered. I looked down at my watch, noting it was 1 a.m. He didn't look like a danger or anything, though, and I didn't think he was what I'd been seeing moving around outside my window, because he was too far away. I closed the curtains and went back to the couch to continue the movie. The curtains, even when fully closed, still had a gap between them, but I didn't see any more movement. It actually made me more curious now that I'd looked out the window. Whatever I'd been seeing had stopped. However, just 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I darted my eyes across the room and stared at the door for a moment. It had to be that drunk guy. I was almost sure of it. What the hell was he doing outside my front door? I didn't get up, hoping he'd just forget about it and leave. But then he knocked again. I went over just to verify it was him. I looked out and saw that same guy with the dark costume on, but something was different. He wasn't stumbling around or swaying or anything like that. The man stood still, almost motionless, just staring at the door. Even through the peephole, I could see his eyes were wide open and fixed on the door handle, waiting for me to open it. I started getting really creeped out. If he were drunk, how the hell was he standing perfectly still and not fumbling around? Especially if he were as drunk as he looked just 10 minutes ago. It made me think he might not be drunk at all and might have just been some lunatic, which was way more concerning. I was really debating calling the police, but just when I was starting to think about it, the man left my doorstep and walked away. He went down the sidewalk for as long as I could see, and looked like he was done with whatever the hell he was doing. I left the door and sat back down. For the next few hours, I really had nothing else worth noting. I ended up having some wine, hoping it'd make me sleepy so I could just go to bed. I knew if I even tried to sleep, though, I'd just be sitting up awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, so it wasn't worth it. But as I was sitting on the couch scrolling on my phone, I suddenly heard a tapping noise. It was from the opposite end of the house. I got up, moving a bit closer, and trying to figure out what it was, and where exactly it was coming from. It sounded like dull tapping, somewhere against the house. I moved into the hallway, and then into the family room. My eyes moved through the room, following the sound to the far window. Then I saw it. The shadow of a man, standing right behind the glass, tapping something against the window. It was too dark to see him clearly, or what he was holding. I just ran straight to the living room and called 911. Eerily, the man didn't stop. I could still hear the slow tapping against the window while I was on the phone. Once officers were on the way, I went back into the hallway and looked out at the window again, hoping to be able to identify if it was the same creepy guy from earlier. But he clearly saw me, because he stopped tapping, stood still for a moment, then walked away. The darkness was too much for me to make out anything, but I couldn't see how it would be anyone other than the man from before. Officers searched the area and took down notes of everything I told them. I gave a very clear description of the man that stopped by earlier. Unfortunately, they didn't find him. The only other tip came in 2 weeks later, where someone a couple streets down called the police for a very similar incident, seeing a strange man stalking their home and acting unnatural. Likely, it's the same person, but as far as what he was and possibly still is attempting to do, nobody knows. I just can't help but wonder what would have happened had I answered the door to him. I'd gotten home from work at 9:30 this night and made a quick bowl of cereal for dinner, then went right to my room where my gaming setup was to stay up late and game with the boys. They all worked later shifts too, and I guess were running a bit late, so I sat there and finished my food, then started gaming without them while I waited for them to get online. In the middle of a game, my phone started ringing. I checked it, thinking it was one of my friends, but it was just some random number. I let it ring through, but just a few minutes later, my phone rang again, and it was the same number. I actually found this to be really weird, because usually scam calls don't call immediately twice in a row, at least not from the same number. I declined it, but as you could have guessed, they called back right away for a third time. Figured there was no way this was a scam, and had to be a friend using a different phone or something. I picked it up, but didn't say anything at first, waiting for them to speak. But after a few seconds of silence, I said hello. Still, no one responded. I knew it wasn't a dead line though, because I could hear wind in the background. Someone was definitely on the other end of the line. I hung up after 15 seconds, getting kinda creeped out. A few minutes later, my buddies got online, and of course the first thing I asked them was who was messing with me. At first, they pretended like it was them, but they were clearly just joking around, because they actually had no idea what I was talking about. They agreed it did sort of seem like a prank call, but at the same time, what kind of prank is it just to call and not say anything? We left it unknown and just started gaming. Oddly, as soon as I was on call with my buddies, the calls stopped coming in. Couple hours went by, and I'd entirely forgotten it ever even happened. At 2 a.m., we finally decided to call it for the night. We hung up the call, and I stayed at my desk for a minute, when suddenly I felt my phone vibrate. I looked over and saw it was a text. Before even unlocking my phone, I saw the text was from the same number that was calling me, and that it was a picture. I opened my phone and clicked on the image. My stomach tightened, and I could feel the blood rush from my face. It was a picture of me gaming at the desk, taken from right behind me just moments ago. I spun around and looked. No one was there. The only slight relief I got was seeing the window right there, and thinking that at least whatever the hell this picture was, it likely wasn't taken from someone inside my house. I hurried up to the window and looked outside. There wasn't anyone in sight. I made sure the window was locked, then closed the blinds. I went back to my desk, still feeling really unsettled as I stared at the picture still up on my phone. I knew how serious and insanely creepy this was. I saved the image and quickly sent it in the group chat with my friends, praying it was somehow one of them pranking me. But none of them even joked this time. They were all telling me to get out of there or call the cops. I felt my heart start pounding as I quietly opened my bedroom door and looked out into the rest of my home. It was real quiet. For some reason, I really wanted to check the rest of the house and make sure the whole place was secure before calling the police, just in case I was in immediate danger. But I barely even made it down the hallway before looking around the corner and seeing the front door. It was wide open. I don't know how, but somehow it was like I knew that someone was just around the corner from me, and I instantly sprinted back to my room and locked the door. Immediately, footsteps came from down the hallway, but he walked slowly, stepping right up to the other side of the door, and then knocked on it. I saw the door handle move, then he knocked a few more times. He never spoke a word. I started a call with the police, but this whole thing didn't last more than 30 seconds. The man behind the door suddenly backed away, and I'm assuming just left the house. A few officers came by and did their investigation, but I didn't get the answers I hoped for. The number he called and texted with was a burner phone, didn't link to a name or anything, and I never actually saw the man, or had even a single hint as to who it was, or why any of it happened. Even now, I can't help but get paranoid sometimes, because what's stopping him from coming back and doing the same thing again, or something even worse? I'm 32 and live in a small home on the countryside. This night was pretty much going normally, up until just before bed. I had this day off and was home all day. I didn't notice anything unusual. Around 9 p.m., I went up to my bedroom and got ready for bed. I was on my phone watching YouTube while trying to fall asleep when I started to hear something. I paused the video. Faintly, I could hear someone talking outside. At least 2 people, maybe more though. The way they were talking was like they were trying to be quiet, which made it all the more suspicious. And this was actually the first time I've ever had anyone trespass, at least that I know of. I mean, I lived pretty far from other houses, and there were no sidewalks or anything near my house, so anyone walking around this close had to know what they were doing. I sat up in bed and tried to listen to what the guys were saying, but it was still too faint, so I got up and went over to the window. As soon as I stepped up to it, all the voices suddenly stopped talking. A chill ran through my body, knowing this had to mean that whoever was out there could see me. But all I saw was darkness covering the entirety of my property. The thought of all their eyes staring up at me in the window was really unsettling. I quickly backed away. I really hoped this was all just an accident, like they somehow didn't know they happened to walk onto my property. But if that was the case, why didn't they leave when they saw my house? Why did it sound like the voices were walking up closer to the house? I waited a few minutes, then walked up to the window again. But again, I didn't see anything. I then went downstairs and up to basically every window, trying to see anything at all. It was the fear of not knowing what was going on, or where they were, that made it so unsettling. I think it was probably 30 minutes after initially hearing the men outside that I decided to risk opening the front door to get a better look and listen. I turned on the light, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. After a few seconds, I stepped a bit further from the door. I didn't hear anything but the wind and the soft sound of crickets in the distance. And past the light, it was way too dark to make out any shapes of trees or anything. But as I stood out there, an overwhelming feeling came over me. My eyes started shifting all around, and I became very paranoid. It was like I could sense multiple eyes looking at me from somewhere. I quickly hurried back inside and locked the door. Probably just a gut feeling, but it felt like something was about to happen. I don't know what, but I didn't want to find out. Once I was inside and with all the doors locked, the feeling faded away, which made me think it really was just a feeling. I grabbed a glass of water and went back upstairs, letting myself calm down and relax before getting back in bed and trying to fall asleep. Took a while, but I did manage to. Had to have been asleep for a few hours, but I was woken up violently by a crashing sound from the hallway just outside my bedroom. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, sprinting up to the door and opening it. I looked into the hallway. There was shattered glass spread all over the floor. Someone had thrown a rock straight through the window that was on the back hallway wall. I genuinely couldn't believe it and stood in shock for several seconds as I processed what this meant. Then I heard the voices again, multiple, all yelling commands at each other, and in between their shouting were heavy slams against the front door. The weight of it shook the whole house. Among the heavy slams, more windows were getting shattered as I went back into the bedroom and locked myself in. I dialed 911. It was while I was still on the call that I heard the terrifying sound of the door crashing open and multiple people running into the house. Their footsteps ran through the bottom floor. I could even hear some of them laughing. The operator on the line said an officer was 5 minutes away, but knowing the group had already broken inside and could probably easily take down the bedroom door, I didn't feel safe waiting. I went up to the window and opened it. Because this place was a ranch home with sloped ceilings, this window gave access to the roof. Obviously, you weren't supposed to get onto the roof from there, as it was incredibly dangerous. but I felt like I didn't have a choice. I crawled out and onto the roof, then closed the window and moved further up to the top. A minute later, the men started banging on the bedroom door. A couple of them yelled to open up, some even using a jokingly friendly voice. It was sickening. Then, it only took a few hits before they bashed it open. Their footsteps scattered around below me. After looking for 30 seconds, I could hear them getting frustrated. They moved through the entire upper floor, probably double-checking every room. After that, I really don't know what was going on. They remained inside the house, though, until police sirens were coming up in the distance. Then the group ran back out of the house and straight into the darkness. I stayed on the roof until officers were inside and able to help me down. I still can't believe I got away from that. A whole group aggressively breaking into my home on the countryside in the middle of the night while I was alone. I can only imagine what they were trying to do. My home was basically trashed, but nothing was really missing, which unfortunately means they definitely were looking for me. I don't know if it was me specifically, or they just happened to choose my house just because, but I don't think I'll ever know.
My friend was throwing a Halloween party with her sorority, and she'd invited me and a couple of other guys. It was a low-key event. Only a couple dozen people would be there, but I preferred that type of scene, so I was excited about it. I was running about an hour late, but I was sure nobody would be there until at least an hour after it started, so I wasn't too worried. My costume was lazy, just the first thing I saw at Party City, a firefighter with a bloody axe. I called an Uber around 7 and let everyone know I was on my way. My driver pulled up in a trash Kia, missing its front bumper and windows tinted nearly pitch black. He rolled down his window and called my name. The guy was wearing sunglasses, even though it was completely dark out, and he had a nasty rash on his face. He had oily, matted hair that clung to his sweaty face. I hesitated a bit before getting in the car, but decided I was being too judgmental and got in. The ride was quiet at first, but then he asked me about my costume. I told him I was on the way to a Halloween party and had to get something last minute. He laughed this awkward, squeaky laugh and told me he'd never been to a party. He went into this monologue about how he never said more than a few words throughout high school, and that people wouldn't even look at him. He started to get mad just remembering it, and hit the steering wheel, then his forehead, while in the middle of his story. He was barely paying attention to the road, and I was sure we were going to crash. I told him it was all right and begged him to keep his eyes on the road. He managed to chill out after a bit and apologized. As we pulled up, he didn't unlock my door for a while and just stared at the house. He muttered something about missing out on life and finally unlocked my door. After I got out, he stayed parked in front of the house until I walked into the living room. The party was mellow. I started drinking immediately to get in a better mood after that guy ruined my spirits. A few drinks in and I was starting to have fun again. The girls who invited me were singing karaoke on the TV, and my friend was jamming out on the guitar. A couple of games of beer pong later, and I had all but forgotten that miserable Uber ride. That was when, around 10, I noticed someone new sitting in the living room. It was a tall, stocky man in a hoodie and a mask of Jason from Friday the 13th. I wondered who had invited him, seeing as everyone was accounted for. The guy sat in complete silence in the corner of the living room while the party went on around him. Eventually, I asked Rachel, my friend hosting the party, who he was. She looked at me, confused, and said that the guy told everyone he was invited by me. At that point, I was past confused and started to get creeped out. I walked up to where he was sitting and quietly watched the party go on around him. He didn't pay attention to me, even though I was standing over him. I went to tap him on the shoulder to get his attention, and he grabbed my arm before I could touch him and squeezed. I yelped and tugged my arm back. He let go and went back to staring at the party. I yelled at him, asking what his problem was, but he stayed completely quiet. Everyone stopped partying and was watching us. I told him to tell me who he was or get out, and he stood up, almost a head taller than me. It wasn't exactly short, but this guy was huge. There was a machete attached to his waist, which I was praying was a prop for his costume. Everyone stopped partying and was watching us. The whole party was dead silent. The guy walked to the middle of the room, put his head in his hands, and started sobbing. Some of his hair spilled out of his hood. It was familiar, black, oily, just like the Uber drivers. We all backed up, while his sobbing turned into screaming. The man grabbed the machete from his waist and pointed it at me. His voice was hard to make out through the mask, but he said something about how it wasn't supposed to be like this. He took the machete and threw it at the TV, shattering the screen, before running out of the house and down the street. Nobody chased him. We all just stood there in stunned silence. I was pumped full of adrenaline after genuinely thinking I was about to die. The first person to break the silence was Rachel, asking if she should call the cops, but there wasn't much of a point. We all left right after that, but I didn't call an Uber. I'm not sure if that guy was my driver, but I can't think of any other good explanation. He was seriously crazy, and I'm just glad nobody got hurt, but I know things could have gone much worse. So since then, I've gotten a lot more cautious about whose car I get in. Even though we were way too old to be trick-or-treating, my friend Jason sent our group chat a text asking if we all wanted to get together in costume and hit up a few houses for free candy. We hadn't heard from Jason in a few days, so it was a bit of a surprise. We all agreed that it could be fun, and planned to meet in one of the neighborhoods known to have the best candy, even though it was a bit remote. I was feeling lazy with my costume, so I dressed up in a black sheet and mask to go as the Scream guy. When we met up, most of my friends had similar ideas, with a Barack Obama and a Joker. The odd one out was Jason. Well, I assumed it was Jason, because he was the only one whose face I couldn't make out. Jason was wearing nothing but a black bodysuit covering everything, including his face and some torn up clothes covered in fake blood. The fact that the costume was so bad made it the most unnerving costume of any of us. We got going around the block. There was only a dozen or so houses on the entire street, so we took our time to talk and mess around. There were a few weird looks from the people answering the doors, but they still gave us candy before we left. One house had a big basket filled with oversized candy bars. I took 2, but the rest of my friends emptied the entire thing except for Jason. Jason actually hadn't said a word the entire time. Eventually, we ran out of houses on that block and had to decide what was next. Kyle, the guy dressed as the Joker, suggested we find another block and get even more candy. I was kind of done with trick-or-treating by then. It did feel childish, especially after seeing how everyone reacted to us being there. Jason finally spoke up for the first time that night. His voice was muffled, so it was a bit hard to understand him. His voice was also deeper than usual, but I figured that was also the costume. He took out his bag and told us that he'd stolen alcohol from his parents and said we should go drink at the park. I wasn't big on drinking, but I figured it was a special occasion, so I might as well let loose for a bit. As we came to an agreement, Jason said he knew a spot where we could drink and eat our candy and that he'd lead us there. I was the only one getting a weird vibe, but after everyone else agreed to it, I gave in and decided to follow Jason. We ended up on a trail that started at the end of the block. It was dark, and the only light came from our phones. We walked for around 20 minutes before finally making it to a spot in the canyon off trail. It was an opening under a canopy of bushes. The place was filled with trash and old beer bottles. There was also a sleeping bag and some broken glass pipes in the dirt. I asked Jason if this was really the place he was thinking of, and he nodded, pointing to the view of the sky through the canopy. It was really nice, I had to admit. The stars were in full view, and the moon was bright enough that I could see everything. We started drinking the stolen vodka. Jason just sat back and watched us through the black face covering while we got more and more drunk. Kyle and Drew were wobbling around like idiots, and I was starting to feel it too. We were making way too much, considering that there were houses just outside of the canyon. As it got later, I knew it was time to head out, but I was starting to feel really out of it, way more than I should have with how much I had drank. The world started to get hazy, and I looked over to find Kyle and Drew both passed out. Jason stood up for the first time and stood over me. I mumbled, asking him what he was doing, and he knelt down over me, inches from my face. I wanted to struggle, but my body wasn't listening. Jason reached out to touch my face, but as he brushed my skin, 3 flashlights shone on the trail and down into our area. Jason, well, by then I was doubting it was Jason at all, got up and ran off just as 3 people hopped down into our camp. I passed out as the officer approached me. The next day we found out that Jason had lost his phone 3 days before, meaning he wasn't the one sending those texts, and he wasn't the one with us that night. Whoever that guy was, he'd spiked our drinks and had something planned for us once we were unconscious. I hope he just wanted to rob us, but I think it might have been something worse. That was the last year I went trick-or-treating. The fun was completely gone, and I couldn't get the feeling of that guy pretending to be Jason touching me out of my head. We never talked much about the incident, and the police never found out who the guy was. I hope he gets caught eventually, and that I never run into him for the rest of my life. Halloween storms always carry extra intensity, as if they somehow match the mood of that day in the year. I remember how powerful the thunder was, the windows rattling and the lights flickering. Even modern conveniences yield to nature, I guess. That night, however, had more to do with the supernatural than anything else. I still get goosebumps when I think about it. My parents were at a party the year this happened, so I decided to have 3 friends over while they were gone: Liam, Sophie, and Josh. We didn't feel like going trick-or-treating that night. So we ended up in the basement playing a dusty old board game. It's kind of funny how we found ourselves playing it despite my uncle's warning. My uncle joked to me once saying, "Never touch that board or you'll be cursed." But there we were, disregarding his advice. I thought my uncle was just pulling my leg, so I figured we were safe to play it. We sat around a folding table, lit a few candles because the power was malfunctioning, and put the little pointer at the center of the board. The game was new to all of us. Liam was brave enough to get us started. "Is anyone there?" He spoke dramatically, as if to imply that the task of questioning the board was frightening. The pointer scraped slowly to Y, then E, then S. We laughed out loud. Sophie quipped playfully, "Nice try, Josh." We assumed he was the one who moved the pointer. It seemed as though silly questions rolled right off our tongues. Will I fail math? Will Sophie marry a rock star? The responses from the pointer on the board made us crack up even harder. I almost forgot the storm outside by this point. The water dripping from the basement ceiling into a rusty pan below didn't even faze me. Then, something strange happened. Without anyone asking, the pointer shifted again, this time on its own. It went from B to U, spelling BEHINDYOU. Behind you. Our laughter was cut short. How did that... Josh turned quickly when the pointer landed, expecting something or someone to be there. All we saw was the furnace looming in the shadows. I couldn't believe it. I knew I saw the pointer move to those words, but there wasn't any logical explanation for it. "Okay, which one of you?" I started. Before I could finish, though, we all heard a heavy thunk rattle through the pipes overhead. Nobody moved a muscle. We all made eye contact, and then Liam suggested, "Wind." It wasn't convincing, his voice cracking from the uncertainty in his belief. "Old house, right?" Then another noise. This time it was lighter, like a shoe scuffling the concrete. What was that? Sophie was the next to speak. "But basements don't have wind." She said it intensely but quietly, as if to get our attention without disturbing someone in the next room. I grabbed the flashlight cautiously, its beam shaky, and surveyed the room. Boxes, shelves, and the furnace. Okay, nothing out of the ordinary. "Let's just pack it up," Josh suggested. "Wait," I said. I had to know how. "One more question." I placed my fingers on the pointer, and then I asked the board, "Who are you?" It moved instantly, without hesitation. This can't be good.
S-T-A-Y. Stay. Suddenly, the candle flames bent sideways, as if someone had breathed on them and put them out. A chilling draft cut through the room, goosebumps forming on my arms. "We're done," Sophie snapped, standing up as she tried to grab the board. But before she could, we noticed something in the corner of the room had stirred. It appeared darker, like it was just another space in the room, only this was pitch black. But then that darkness shifted, lifting, stretching, and a shape began to take form. It was taller than any of us, and its head scraped the low beams. The others didn't get a clear look at it, but I did. The outline. It had a face, pale and featureless, like chalk. I felt my chest drop. Then the flashlight flickered out. No. I should have listened to my uncle. I thought. Whatever it was alone with us in the dark. I heard a whisper. It was Liam, petrified, saying run. We bolted to the stairs, heavy steps striking the concrete behind us. I knew the figure was gaining on us, but I couldn't force myself to look back. Josh shoved Sophie up the stairs ahead of him, and I was the last one to make it to ground level. I slammed the basement door. At first, I was surprised by silence, then the knob twisted. I immediately grabbed it tightly before the door could fully open, as my heart pounded like it would break free from its cage. The figure we saw yanked the door harder than human hands should. Just when I thought the door would give way, there was silence. I didn't hesitate any longer. I signaled to Sophie to grab the phone in the kitchen. She dialed 911 frantically, informing the operator of what we had just witnessed. My friends huddled in fear as I kept a hand on the doorknob at all times. Minutes later, a police officer arrived, and as if on cue, the power miraculously came back on. We felt dread as the police officer stepped down into the basement, the place from which we had narrowly escaped. He flicked on the light and began rummaging through boxes and shelves, peering at the furnace. Nothing out of the ordinary so far. No one was there, at least not anymore. There were no other footprints either. The dusty floor hadn't picked up a trace of other footsteps except for our scramble to the door. The police officer concluded the premises were clear of any other presence, his tone condescending. He looked at us as if he didn't believe our account, but didn't have the audacity to call us liars. After the police officer established we were safe, we dragged the game out to the trash, recovering our wits as best as we could. We didn't say much. It wasn't long before their parents arrived to pick them up. I had to wait in that house alone, my parents still out, and by this time, the storm had died, the candles had burned out, and the basement door was still closed. That night was hard to sleep. Whatever I saw might still be there. I didn't tell my parents yet, but I decided the next morning I would prove to myself it was nothing. As the sunrise illuminated the valley, I looked for the game in the trash. The only problem was, it wasn't there. I couldn't find it anywhere. I looked and looked. I finally found it, back on the table, in the basement, with the pointer in the center. How did it... Before I could answer that thought, I saw a single word spelled out on the board. I still get the shivers. All it spelt was S-T-A-Y.
Halloween night had a strange energy that year, even before anything actually went wrong. It was almost the way the air carried that sharp bite of fall, the way every porch light seemed dead, making more shadows than actual light. My little brother and sister were thrilled, faces painted, plastic pumpkins swinging from their arms, darting up the driveways with that sugar rush excitement only kids can muster up. Me, I was 19, way too old to be out here, and yet here I was, carrying the mantle of the responsible one. My mom had asked me to tag along since Dad was working late, and she didn't trust the neighborhood enough to send the kids off alone. I graduated that year, supposed to be figuring college or a job out, something. Instead, I was walking two kids in costumes down the streets that I'd trick-or-treated myself a decade earlier. Now, don't get me wrong, I love them. I'd do anything for them. But being 19 and stuck babysitting on Halloween night felt like one more reminder that I hadn't gotten my own life together yet. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. A buddy of mine was close by, down one of the side streets. He had this little baggie for me, nothing major. I'd been looking forward to it all week. Just a quick handoff, maybe share a joint, nothing crazy, 5 minutes tops. The kids, they'll be fine. They had friends in their group, and every house on the street has a porch light glowing. It couldn't be any safer in my mind. All right, you two stick to this block, okay? I said, crouching down to look them eye to eye. My sister's vampire fangs had slipped down to where she grinned, and my brother was busy adjusting the mask on his cheap Batman costume. Both of them nodded back at me. Don't go past that corner. I'll be right back. They didn't question it. Candy was calling. So they bolted off toward the next house, already comparing loot from their pumpkins. I slid down that side street, my steps quick to get this over with. I wanted nothing more than to just get baked. The noise of kids laughing, the porch chimes rattling would grow quieter with each yard that I passed. The street lights thinned out here. The glow of jack-o'-lanterns gave way to more shadows. It was amazing how fast the atmosphere would shift when you left that main drag. Just one block over and it felt like another world completely. That itch in me, the need for something reckless, something just mine, pulled me along though. I felt guilty, sure, but I told myself again and again it's not that big of a deal. I'll be back before the kids will even notice. My mom will never know. Nobody would except me, my buddy, and the weed. I spotted my friend near the end of the lane, leaning up against a half-busted picket fence with his hoodie pulled up. The street was quiet. The sounds of crickets were filling in the gaps between our words. If I'd known what was waiting in the dark, just beyond that fence, I never would have gone there. He handed me that little baggie like it was nothing. We barely had enough time to laugh about sneaking it past my folks before the brush beside us erupted. We never really stood a chance. Something exploded out of the shadows. He came fast, really fast, like he'd been coiled there waiting for the moment to strike. 1 second it was just us, leaves rustling. The next there was a full-grown man barreling right into us. He didn't yell words, he screamed, an animal shriek that ripped through me worse than the impact of his actual body, and the man sounded absolutely terrified. My friend hit the dirt, the baggie flying. I staggered back, arms up instinctively, and then his weight slammed into me again. His face was now inches from mine, eyes glassy, wild, pupils blown out wide. I couldn't even see the color around him. His mouth was foaming. Spit sprang across my cheek as he clawed at my jacket. I shoved him, but he came back twice as strong. His fists weren't controlled punches, they were frantic. He scratched, he bit at the air like a rabid dog. My buddy scrambled up and grabbed the guy by the shoulders, trying to drag him back. For a second, I thought we'd actually get him off of me, but then the man twisted, swinging his elbows and catching my friend across the jaw, so hard that I heard his teeth clack. "What the fuck, man?" my buddy yelled, holding his face. I didn't waste time. I ran my shoulder into that guy's chest, shoving with everything I had. He stumbled backward into the brush, legs tangling up in the branches, and then just like that, he was gone. He disappeared so quickly it was as if it never even happened. I stood there trying to catch my breath. My hands shook as I looked over at my friend. Blood was trickling from his split lip, his hoodie ripped at the shoulder. "What the hell was that?" he said. I couldn't answer because there wasn't an answer. Then, more sounds hit us, screams. Not the wild animal screaming of the man, but the terrified broken sound of children crying out. Shit, my brother, my sister. Every ounce of blood in me immediately turned to ice. "Shit," I whispered. Then I was running. We tore down the lane, shoes pounding the asphalt. I could hear my buddy behind me swearing under his breath, but all I could think about was those screams. Every second counted. Every step felt like I wasn't fast enough. My friend and I were pretty decent-sized dudes, even at 19. It took both of us, everything we had to get that dude off of us. My kids' siblings, they didn't stand a chance, and in my mind, they were already dead. We rounded the corner and I saw them, my siblings struggling in the man's grip. He had them both, arms like iron bands around their small bodies, dragging them toward a ditch that ran alongside the road. Their candy bags were overturned, chocolate bars and lollipops littering the ground. I screamed at him to let go, and the man didn't even turn his head. He snarled some kind of weird, awful sound, tightening his grip on my brother, dragging him down into the weeds. My sister clawed at his arms, her fangs clattering out of her mouth as he screamed out for me. I didn't think anymore, I just threw myself at him. We crashed into the ditch together. My shoulder screamed with pain as it hit the dirt, but adrenaline kept me moving. I grabbed fistfuls of filthy shirts, yanking him off my siblings, punching wildly. My friend was there too, swinging a rock that he picked up, smacking the guy across the back of the head. The man didn't stop. If anything, he got worse. He clawed at me, fingernails raking against my cheek. I felt the sting of blood, but I still didn't stop. I scrambled free, sobbing while my brother kicked the man in the ribs with the force of sheer panic. I told them to run, to get back, go. But they didn't. They hovered close, too terrified to leave me. The guy lunged again, teeth bared now, like he was gonna bite me. I ducked and drilled him in the ribs. It wasn't a lights-out hit or anything, but it was enough to check him. He stopped and actually gasped out loud, grabbing his stomach, acting human for a brief moment. For a brief moment, he stood there, chest heaving, eyes bulging, drool and blood slicking his chin. His body trembled like he couldn't contain the madness within it. And just like that, he bolted, tore off into the woods, crashing through the branches, his screams echoing long after he was gone. The silence that followed was worse than the actual fight. My siblings were clinging to me, both sobbing, their costumes torn, faces streaked with tears and dirt. My brother's voice cracked when he said, "He was gonna take us, he was gonna..." "Don't." I cut him off, pulling them both close. "He's gone, okay? I promise you're okay now, you're okay." But the truth hit me. They weren't okay. I wasn't okay. None of us were. But I guess we were alive. We stood there in the wreckage, candy crushed under feet, the night around us heavy with the weight of what just took place. My friend was leaning up against a fence, pale, blood still seeping from his lip, muttering "Jesus Christ" over and over. "We're going home, now." "Yeah." "You got a phone?" "No, man." "All right, well, walk with us. Let's stay together." Every step we took felt like we were walking through some kind of enemy territory, shadows pressing in on all sides. I kept my siblings in front of me, my buddy trailing behind. I didn't care about the weed, didn't care about my split cheek or the blood on my hands. All I cared about was getting them home. Every rustle of the leaves, every crack of a branch, I was sure he was coming back for us. My little brother clutched my hand so tight that it cut off my circulation. My sister walked on my other side, pressing tight against me, her plastic pumpkin swinging empty and broken. My buddy limped behind, spitting blood into the gutter, glancing over his shoulder every couple of steps. By the time my house came into view, I thought my heart was going to give out. We stumbled inside, slammed the door, and locked it twice. My brother started crying again, loud, heavy sobs. My sister wasn't much better. I tried to sound calm, but my voice shook when I said it's okay. We're home. You're safe. My parents' face went white when they saw us. My mom grabbed my sister, checking her over, while Dad got on the phone with the police. I kept saying the same thing to them. Some guy, he came out of nowhere. He tried to take them. But the words would get caught in my throat. The cops rolled up quick, and for once, sirens were the best sound I'd ever heard. They fanned out through the neighborhood, flashlights sweeping throughout the woods. Less than an hour later, they came back with them. I only caught a brief glimpse as they pushed him into the back of the cruiser. His shirt was torn, his arms were scratched to ribbons from all the brush, his face was streaked with blood and spit. He was still screaming, words jumbled, thrashing like some kind of man possessed. One of the officers shook his head and muttered, "Hopped up on God knows what. Lucky you kids got away, huh?" Lucky, that's what they called it, but luck didn't explain the way his eyes looked, those black pits void of reason. Luck didn't really explain how strong he'd been or the way his shrieks cut through the night. That incident ended up defining the rest of the year. My siblings would sleep in our parents' bed for weeks. Me? I'd lie awake, staring up at the ceiling, hearing phantom footsteps outside, knowing now that monsters don't really have to wear masks on Halloween. They're just people. The Autumn Festival was definitely something our town lived for. One night a year when Main Street didn't feel like an actual ghost town. The courthouse steps glowed underneath orange string lights. The smell of cider hung in the air, and every shop front had pumpkins propped up in the windows, scarecrows left and right. You could almost trick yourself into thinking that we were part of some postcard perfect New England hamlet instead of a place where the Dairy Queen had gone under. Not once, but twice. I was stuck running the ring toss booth with 3 of my friends, our quote-unquote volunteer hours for National Honor Society. Mostly, it meant leaning up against the counter, heckling kids who couldn't throw a plastic ring over a 2-liter bottle. The prizes were dollar store junk, but the little ones went wild for them. I pretended to care because, well, that's what you do when you're 17 and don't want to look like a complete waste of space. The street was crowded, families with strollers, couples with styrofoam bowls of chili, the marching band hammering out some screechy version of Sweet Caroline. Booths and vendors lined up on both sides of the road. Cotton candy, face painting, raffle tickets for a quilt made by the Methodist ladies. Above it all, paper lanterns bobbed in the cool October wind. For a while, it was all background noise, the normal. And then I took notice of something. 2 men, I guess they could have been kids, coming down the sidewalk in stiff lockstep. Both wore these crude paper mache masks, which were uncommon. Bulbous noses, lopsided grins, paint smeared on like clown makeup. At first I assumed it had to be part of the festival, right? But nobody else's costume matched up with these guys. They stood out in a way that made me feel very uncomfortable. They're really tall as well, eerily so. Even from across the street where I stood, I could tell something was off about their arms, the way they swung low as hell, hands almost dangling to their knees. Their bodies were narrow, compressed, like somebody had stretched them from head to toe. I immediately felt the hair on my neck stand up, though I couldn't have told you why. When I told this story to a college friend, he told me that I experienced the uncanny valley effect. A woman and child passed by our booth right then, a mom with tired eyes holding her daughter's hand. The girl was carrying a candy apple bigger than her fist, red glaze catching the lamplight. She laughed, tugging at her mom to stop near the petting zoo. Normal, ordinary, safe. What the American experience is all about. The masked men slowed as they passed, their crude grins frozen on us now. Nobody else seemed to notice, just me standing there with the ring in my hand, my throat now gone dry. Something about them pressed on me, but my instincts were telling me to run. My buddy next to me laughed, said they looked like scarecrows on stilts, but I kept watching until they disappeared off into the crowd. Okay, I'm imagining things, it's Halloween, whatever I'm doing, it's all in my head. Seeing them melt off with normal people was a huge relief. Actually, as it meant, well, they were probably normal, just leaning hard into the whole Halloween vibe, The band took a break and the PA whined. People were drifting toward chili and cider, and we kept the rings moving and the line honest. The mother and the girl came back over. The girl's candy apple was half eaten, red chips of sugar stuck to her fist. They crossed the alley between the barber shop and the antique place. A string of lights sagged above it. Half the bulbs were dead, so they were caught in some kind of darkness. Then, 10 steps behind them though, the 2 masked men were altering their course the same way, and they turned like a rolling tide. You see that? I asked. Hayes squinted. The sheriff stood by the dunk tank, towel over his shoulder, laughing with the volunteers. The mother glanced back, tightening her grip on the girl, and started to move faster. Then the tall guys went turbo and quickly closed the distance in a second. They flanked the girls and had them cornered before I knew it. I vaulted the booth and ran. I heard Hayes swear and then followed me. It smelled like candy and popcorn, which was comforting in the moment, but my body was running on pure adrenaline. It was this really weird contrast in the moment. They had the woman up against the wall, her arm across the child, one man leaning up close. When I got closer, the mask wasn't this sloppily crafted thing. It was smooth and chalky, hairline cracks spidering that painted grin. Not a single inch of skin was exposed anywhere, despite all the long, creepy limbs. "Hey, back off," I said. They ignored me. The second man shifted so he could block the view. Hayes quickly grabbed up a folding chair and made like he was going to take a swing. One of the creeps turned around, but really only turning his head all the way around, almost like an owl would, and I couldn't believe what I was watching. Hayes then swung for real, wrestler, no-nonsense kid. and flecks fell from the mask like powder. Under it was the same paste, impacted now, like that's what his face was actually made of. I hooked the girls and hauled off. They folded into me, heavy with fear. The man's hand slid off the mother's shoulders and left this gray smear on her blouse. The guy blocking us snapped this long arm at Hayes and caught his wrist. I heard Hayes scream. The elbow flexed and hyperextended, whatever you call it, and Hayes was reeling with pain. I kicked the man's shin, and I fully blasted him. I heard him grunt and he let Hayes go. Then all of us retreated back to that ring toss booth. We pushed back into Maine. The crowd turned toward the noise now. A dad in a ball cap ran up with his hands balled up. A vendor grabbed this metal ladle like a weapon. Our principal then charged through, palms out, barking orders. Soon, a little posse of defenders had formed and started to circle those two guys. The tall men moved in these short, rapid steps that ate up the distance quickly. It was almost like watching crabs walk. One of them hit the deputy who had sprinted over from the dunk tank. He knocked the officer into the bushes and then jumped on top of him, blows raining down. I was closest. I started to move in, which ended up being a big mistake. The second tall man slapped me in the ribs unbelievably hard. I can't even explain how. Pain then flared up and I doubled over. It was almost like getting hit with a brick. Hayes hauled me up and dragged me back to the booth, and the others cut in and circled. The little girl was now sobbing, and the mother kept whispering to her that it's okay. People flooded the alley and froze when they saw the faces. They didn't have weapons or anything. It was just how creepy they looked up close. People were calling for them to freeze, hold up, stand down, but nothing was getting through to them. They resorted to threats and still didn't get any kind of response. A folding chair then arced through the air, pinged off one of the masked men. The guy didn't stumble an inch though, and they moved toward the park end of Maine where the pines stood tall and dark. A plastic perimeter fence ran the end of the line, and the men didn't jump it. They slipped through the gaps, just off the ground, bodies flattening and sliding. The fence didn't make a sound as they passed through it. A deputy fired off into the tree line, a shot that cracked and vanished into the pines. Then, noise rushed back. A generator stuttered. People screamed. We couldn't believe this idiot had just discharged a firearm, but after seeing that, I guess I don't really blame him. The mother sank to the curb, cradling her baby. Her blouse had that gray streak that flaked when she moved. The sheriff took everything in and barked out orders. Cones went up, police tape, radios. He tried drunks in masks, and it sounded weak. The deputy had gotten beaten down and didn't make eye contact with anybody. The statements had come in. They were tall and local. They weren't human. The mask wouldn't come off. Somebody swore they heard a laugh and it sounded robotic, and others said there'd been no sound at all when they came in. It had everybody on this Men in Black thing for a while. EMTs would ice Hayes' elbow and taped it up. They checked me and pressed a cold pack to my ribs. They wrapped the girl up in a foil blanket and coaxed her into sipping a bottle of water. She kept staring at the alley mouth, eyes blown wide like somebody had seen the other side of reality. By the time they got lights and bodies ready to search, the pines had already swallowed up any sign of them. The perimeter fence looked intact unless you peered up close, where a faint gray dust would paint some of the gaps. The sheriff closed the festival down early. Pack up, lock it down, post cars. He ordered more lights, officers, and volunteers. People would nod along, but it was really bizarre to watch. I could tell nobody really knew what to do, so they were primed to buy into anything. We left in groups, and I walked home with Hayes and some other kids. My ribs still kind of burned. Hayes kept rubbing his elbow as if checking whether the joint would hold up for him. At home, I scrubbed that gray from my palms until the water ran clean. There was a weird chalky smell everywhere that they touched me. To my knowledge, nobody ever saw them again. The town added patrols and light. The festival committee bought metal detectors. Nobody really knew why. The alley got a no loitering sign. People would try to call it a prank or a stunt, but I don't think it really stuck. Even the jokers walked straighter down the middle of the sidewalk now. Nobody wanted to get blamed for it. The sheriff stood in front of the courthouse steps the next morning, told the local paper it had been a couple of masked drunks, hopped up and looking for trouble. That was the official line, and he stuck to it. But everybody who had actually been there, the mothers clutching their kids, the dads who had charged in and been thrown aside, the high schoolers nursing their bruises, we all knew better. They seen the way those men moved, the way the masks cracked without coming off, the way the festival completely fell apart. Nobody said it out loud, but nobody bought the story either. And from then on, the festival committee approved floodlights at every corner. Volunteers would patrol, bag checks at the gates. Security tripled for every parade, every fair, and every market. And I guess, what else can you really do? We got invited to a costume party, and we were about to roll up late because my cape got caught in the seatbelt and because my partner, Tessa, insists on fixing the fake blood at every single red light. The house is a full-body shout, orange lights along the roofline, plastic gravestones stabbed into the lawn, a fog machine breathing out like a dragon. The base would dump to the driveway. Somewhere inside, somebody was yelling, "Time for a contest," and somebody else screams for fun. I am a lazy vampire, thrift store coat, dollar store fangs. Tessa is a glammed up witch with glitter in her hair and boots that could kick down a door. We promised one another we'd only stay an hour, 2 max. We promised to ghost early if it got weird. We're not really the party-goer type. At the door, a scarecrow with a beer breathes on us and slaps bracelets on our wrists. "Open bar," he says, which catches our attention. Inside a hurricane, strobe lights, smoke, paper bats, the sweet rot of spilled punch. A guy in a rubber wolf head slowly dances with a nurse. 2 pumpkins are arguing about Taylor Swift. A Grim Reaper is taking selfies with a fireman, both of them laughing hard enough to cry. And there are goblins everywhere for some reason. We float with the party, grab some plastic cups from a cauldron and sip. Sweet, strong, and utterly perfect. Friends materialize and then vanish again. I let the music stitch me off into the room, and Tessa leans into me and shouts, "You owe me for the glitter," then kisses my cheek, leaving a galaxy there. She looks sexy, and it's all for me. As I look around in the room, I notice 3 men near the back wall, almost in costumes. They were cheap black hoodies, dime store masks, the kind you just kind of grab at the register. Not Jason, not Ghostface, just those blank ones. They weren't really talking to anybody. I didn't see them dancing. They were just kind of watching. One of them tracks Tessa like he's counting her heartbeats. So I assume they're friends of friends, shy, baked, whatever, and I lift up my cup again. And now it tastes a little different, bitter under the sugar. My tongue goes numb along the edges, and a cold wire climbs up my spine. "Damn," Tessa says, making a face, but she drinks it anyway. I do too, because it's what you do, because we're here to relax and be dumb in a safe way. Somebody from across the room yells shots, and a tray appears, red liquid and glass syringes. People cheer. This room is a carnival ride that you can't get off of. I take one, and Tessa takes one. They burn cherry and medicine-like. The crowd howls. The scarecrow dings a triangle with a butter knife and declares the dance floor is now open. Fog rolls in, the strobe tightens off into this heartbeat. We send for another shot, and then the world tilts. It's really subtle at first, like the floor swells up under my shoes and then settles again. Then the corners of the room smear, voices start to pitch. The wolf's rubber head turns slowly, like a bad dream that's starting to buffer. Tessa blinks and then misses a step. "Hey," she says, but it sounds like it's in slow motion. A hand grazes my shoulder. One of the blank masks has now drifted up a lot closer. Up close, it's even stranger. There's no details, just eye holes and a slit for a mouth. He doesn't say anything or speak, he just nods at my cup, then at Tessa's, like he approves. I set the cup down. The air thins. Music turns into something acidic, and I can't tell if my heart is pounding or if the speakers are inside my ribs. Tessa squeezed my wrists hard and desperately. Her pupils are blown wide. "What is this?" she asked me, and the words reach me from the end of a long hallway. Across the room, another blank mask lifts up a pitcher, moves among the revelers, topping off cups with a host easy confidence. People laugh. A girl dressed as an angel hiccups and sits down abruptly, feathers going limp. One by one, I see others hit the furniture in the same stupor. I look over at Tessa. Her smile is gone now. Mine evaporates quickly after it. We nod once, the oldest language there is. We aim for the stairs, for air, for distance, whatever. But the party surges and the fog breathes and the house keeps us in the swarm. The floor seems to be moving in swells. People slump mid-laugh, mid-dance, eyes glassy. A pirate collapses into a chair. A goblin crumbles to his knees. "Tessa," I whisper, and the name steadies me. Glitter streaks across her cheek like war paint. We fought towards the stairs. A blank mask then drifts by, pitcher in hand, tipping it into every glass. Nobody seems to be questioning it either. They cheer and then sway a little more. A hand then grabs my elbow. Wrong hand, weird grip. Latex smell, mint breath. A white mask inches from my face. The slit of a mouth speaks to me. "Party's rolling," he says, voice calm, bored almost. Tessa digs her nails into me and yanks me free. We push through the crowd with our heads down. The music slows until it almost is sludge. Somebody drops a bottle, and instead of laughter, the room exhales in a groan. Everybody is tripping, and nobody realizes it yet. On the stairs, Cleopatra sits down mumbling. The fog machine continues to scream. The strobe blinks impossibly fast. We quickly spot the half bath. Tessa reaches, and a masked man steps out, blocking with one hand. "Staff only." "It's a house," she snaps back, though her voice is syrup thick. His hands shift an inch, daring us, but we squeeze through anyway, slam the lock, and press backs up against the thin wood. We can hear him pressing in from the other side, but the door holds, and we lean against it just to make sure. The bathroom is coffin small. The fan hums overhead, which is pretty useless. A pumpkin candle drowns in wax, a scent of fake cinnamon mixing with our sweat. "They dosed us," Tessa says, gripping the counter. "Something fast acting." She pinches her thigh, leaving crescents. I'm here. I clutch my phone trying to dial. My fingers don't seem to be working. I drop it. Tessa snatches it, but her hands shake too. She manages to get a hold of 911 and shoves it back at me. "Give them an address. Hold out, just hold out."
911, what's your emergency?
3616 Oak Rome Drive. I croak out.
What's your emergency?
Drugged. Tessa drops the phone. Something bumps the door. A polite knock with just 2 knuckles. "Open up." Tessa presses her palm to the lock. "Go away." I can tell the light is quickly going out of her. I laugh on the other side. No footsteps leaving, just breathing. Then the knob rattles, sharp and insistent. The latch holds, but I'm not sure for how long. "Tessa." I take her hand. It trembles as if she's having a seizure. "Keep quiet. We don't open." She nods. Her pupils are blown wide. "If they get in?" She jabs 2 fingers up at me. "Throat, teeth. We use whatever we got." The words stick to me. Eyes, throat, teeth. The hallway grows louder. Something's being dragged outside, a muffled sob. A man's voice saying, "Shh, shh." A chair tips over and clatters. A bottle smashes. Laughter, endless. These people came here with a plan, and it's going swimmingly for them. Tessa then presses her forehead to mine. "We're not going out there." "No, we're not." The door jumps as somebody throws a shoulder. The lock quivers. Tessa stifles a sob with her fist, but it just falls away limp. I press my heel hard up against the bottom, bracing as much as I can. We've lost almost all motor function from whatever they got us with. The seconds stretch on, then it stops. Footsteps fade. More chaos explodes somewhere deeper in the house. Screams cut off midstream. We continue to lean into the walls, just breathing. "Hey, we're okay," I tell her. "We're okay." But we're not. "We're gonna make it, okay?" I say to her. At this point, my lips were completely numb, and I really couldn't move. We sat in silence, breath sinking, listening and listening. Time goes on. People cry, voices shout. Something heavy falls with a huge crash. I hear more broken glass and more laughter. "Eyes," Tessa whispers again, our mantra now. "Throat, teeth." Her hand never leaves mine. We hold our ground in that stifling bathroom, breath ragged, skin clammy. Every noise outside is a trigger. Shoes scuffing on wood, glass breaking, somebody pleading. The masked men moving throughout the house like wolves, organized, efficient. Not drunk or sloppy, just working on the clock as it were. Tessa squeezes my hand until my knuckles crack. "Don't let go," she whispers, and I don't. Then the air shifts. It's faint at first and a hum beneath the chaos. Sirens, one, then more, cutting through the night. Blue strobes leak through the frosted bathroom window, painting us now in flashes. The house reacts, feet thunder across the floor, and voices snap short commands. "Go! Go! Get everything!" Sharp and panicked. A crash as somebody throws something through a window, another scream, and this one is real, not dulled by any drugs. A doorknob rattles one last time, a palm slapped flat against the wood, sliding down with a groan of frustration. Then it's gone. "Don't move," I whisper, though neither of us could stand even if we tried. The front door then bursts open. I hear heavy footsteps and shouts from the police, telling them to get their hands up. A fight seems to unfold, running, cursing, bodies colliding, the dull rapport of somebody slamming something against drywall. Tessa presses her forehead onto my shoulders and mutters a prayer that's mostly just breath. Then a knock, this one loud and official. "Police! Anybody in there?" "Yes," I manage, but I barely even get the words out. I fumble with the latch, my hands are stiff and half dead. The door opens to a wall of uniforms, flashlights cutting through the fog, guns still raised. Behind them, the house is wreckage. Costumes are shredded, furniture is overturned, unconscious bodies lying up in piles. They pull us out. Tessa clings to me, knees buckling. Officers then step past us, sweeping on, calling out. Somebody begins to sob, then everybody does. On the floor, one of the masks lie abandoned, white and plastic, blank, streaked with red, and I can't stop looking at it. It's not scary in the way it should be. It's terrifying because it's nothing. No expression, no humanity, just a void, an anonymous villain that I'll probably never see again. An EMT wraps a blanket around my shoulders. Another steadies Tessa, checking her pulse. I can't even answer their questions. I can only stare at that mask as they bag it for evidence. That Halloween was supposed to be a party. Instead, now it's a crime scene. No one ended up knowing those guys, but another party had been hit in a similar way that same night. Career criminals looking for some kind of come-up, and the spirit of Halloween gave them this perfect cover to come in and mess it all up. Too bad for us, as we did get drugged, robbed, and physically assaulted, but to my knowledge, no justice was ever served.
I went to a somewhat rural high school, the kind where everybody knew everybody, at least by face and name. My graduating class had under 200 kids. Walking the hallways, even if you weren't friends with someone, you'd still nod or say hey. It was the kind of school where the loudest gossip never made it past a couple of classrooms, and news of serious drama was rare. This happened when I was a sophomore, so around 16 years old. It was a Wednesday, early fall. The air smelled like the first hints of winter coming in, over the fields behind the school. I remember that detail because I was standing by the lockers, my backpack half zipped, when I noticed a kid staring off toward the woods behind the football field. His name was Mason. Quiet kid, kind of withdrawn. Not in a weird way, but he just didn't talk unless somebody talked to him first. Most of us had noticed him, but nobody really hung out with him much. That morning had been normal. Fourth period was world history, and Mr. Duncan had just started going over a new lecture about the Great Depression. The room was quiet, except for a few kids whispering back and forth. I was sitting near the back by the window, half listening, doodling in my notebook. Then the loudspeaker came on. "Attention, all staff and students. This is a lockdown, not a drill. Lock your doors, turn off the lights, and move to the designated safe areas immediately." At first, people laughed, thinking it was one of those early year false alarms, but then you could see the fear set in on Mr. Duncan's face. He didn't chuckle or roll his eyes like he usually did when the PA went off for drills. He just said, "Everybody under the desks, now." We scrambled, shoving chairs and backpacks to block the door. I slid under my desk and crouched, heart racing, trying not to make a sound. Around me, whispers started. What's happening? Did someone actually get in? The school was small, only 2 floors, with the gym at one end and the library at the other. Security was decent, but we weren't in a completely isolated area. The woods were close, the road wasn't far, and there had been rumors over the years about someone trying to break in during the summer. Nothing ever happened. The first few minutes were eerily quiet, apart from the faint sound of sirens somewhere in the distance. Then I heard something from the hallway outside our classroom. Footsteps. Somebody was walking down the hall, and it sounded like they were testing the doors, checking the handles. Then came a knock. 3 slow taps. "It's okay, this is just a drill," a male voice said. Everybody froze. Mr. Duncan motioned for us to stay down. I could hear kids breathing harder. The person outside jiggled the door handle, trying to force it. Then the voice got louder. "Open up. Come on, it's fine. Just a drill." I remember thinking, he knows this isn't a drill. He's just trying to trick us. Minutes passed. The knocking stopped, but the footsteps didn't. They moved down the hallway and stopped in front of the next classroom. I could hear muffled shouting from somewhere else in the building. Maybe from another teacher trying to calm their students. Then came a scream. Not a loud, panicked scream, but a sharp, terrified one. My stomach dropped. That wasn't fake. We stayed under the desks for what felt like hours. In reality, it was probably close to 40 minutes. Sirens were getting louder and closer. Then the loudspeaker came back on. This time it was the principal. His voice was steady, but you could hear the urgency behind it. "Officers are on site. Remain in lockdown. Do not leave your classroom. Do not respond to anyone at the door except law enforcement." I tried to stay calm, but my mind kept racing. Who was in the school? And why? Mason, the quiet kid I mentioned earlier, was sitting at the desk near mine. I could see his hand shaking under the table. I wanted to say something to calm him down, but I didn't dare move. And we heard it. Metal scraping against the floor. I peered under the desk slightly, just enough to see the handle of the classroom door moving. Somebody was trying again. The voice from before came back. "Open the door, please. I'm not going to hurt anyone." That was the last straw. I whispered to Mason, "Do you know who it is?" He shook his head, wide-eyed, muttering, "No, I didn't. I didn't do it." I don't know what he meant at first, but then I remembered seeing him outside the school that morning, near the woods, looking at something, or someone, with a strange intensity. A pit formed in my stomach. Could he? I didn't want to believe it. Mason was quiet, yes, maybe weird in a harmless way, but he didn't seem violent. Still, the way he looked now, tense, eyes darting toward the door, made me uneasy. Finally, the sirens were deafening and police were shouting through megaphones. After what seemed like an eternity, the door handle stopped moving. The principal's voice came back over the PA. "Lockdown is over. Police have secured the building. No students are injured. Please stay in your classrooms until staff can escort you safely." When the doors were unlocked, we filed out in small groups. Teachers checking IDs, police moving methodically through the halls, and that's when I saw Mason being led away by 2 officers. He wasn't resisting, but his face was pale and blank. No emotion. Later, I found out what happened. Mason had brought a backpack to school that day with several knives inside. He planned to confront a few of the older kids who had been picking on him since freshman year. The rumor was that he was going to make a scene, scare them, and maybe even harm them. But he panicked when he saw the police arriving and locked himself in a storage closet before they found him. Nobody was hurt, but the lockdown was necessary. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment under the desk with him beside me, fear on his face. Part of me hated myself for not noticing the signs and for not saying anything earlier when he seemed more withdrawn than usual. Another part of me was terrified I could have been hurt or worse. Weeks later, when Mason was in juvenile detention, the school held a meeting with students about mental health and bullying. They didn't go into details about the knives or the potential for violence. It was all very carefully phrased. But I remember looking around at my classmates, realizing how little we actually knew about the people around us. How somebody so quiet and invisible could plan something like that, and nobody would notice until it was almost too late. I've thought about Mason a lot since then. I don't know where he is now. I hope he got help and that he's not planning anything dangerous anymore. But the memory of that day, the sound of footsteps outside the classroom, slow knocks, and the scream down the hall, the sirens blaring, still makes my chest tighten whenever I think about it. That lockdown taught me something I'll never forget. You never really know the weight someone carries or the thoughts they hide behind their quiet eyes. And sometimes, even in a small town and a school where everybody seems familiar, danger can sneak in silently, almost invisible, until it's too close to ignore. Even now, if I drive past my old high school, I can remember the windows of that classroom, and the feeling of crouching under a desk, and The sense of absolute helplessness, knowing that somebody had been in the building with intentions we can only guess at. And I think about Mason and the small, almost imperceptible moments that led up to that lockdown, and I wonder how close we came to losing everything we thought was safe and normal. I always thought substitutes were just background noise, the teachers you didn't know, the ones you barely remembered the next week. That's why it was so unsettling when Mr. Cross came to our school during my senior year. It was a gray Thursday morning, the kind of day where the sky seems heavy and the hallways smell like wet coats and cafeteria fries. Our regular teacher, Mr. Levin, had called in sick, and the principal shuffled a substitute into our class at the last minute. His name was Mr. Cross. He looked older than most subs, in his mid-40s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. He didn't smile, not once. He introduced himself quietly and started taking attendance. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual, but then, weirdly, I felt his eyes on me. He lingered on my name when he called it. Not a quick glance, he held it, studying me as if he could see through me. Class went on and I tried to ignore it, but his attention didn't drift. He asked questions only I could answer, and when I gave them, he nodded slowly, like he was jabbing away every word I said. By the end of the period, I felt watched. Not in the typical teacher way, something darker. The next day, he was assigned to our English class. That's when it got worse. He wasn't just watching me anymore, he was waiting for me. I came in late because my locker jammed, and when I stepped inside, he was already there, leaning against the wall near my desk. I froze. He didn't say anything, just tilted his head, and for a second, the room seemed impossibly silent. "Glad you could join us," he said softly. His voice didn't carry authority, it was almost a whisper, but somehow it cut through the chatter of the class. I mumbled a response and sat down, my stomach feeling tight. My friends noticed I was pale and kept nudging me, whispering to ask if I was okay, but I couldn't explain it. I didn't fully understand it myself. It escalated over the next week. Mr. Cross would linger outside classrooms, just standing in the hallway when I passed, pretending to look at a poster or check a clipboard, but he was always there, timing it perfectly so he could see me. I started avoiding the cafeteria, the library, and even the hallways during passing periods, but nothing helped. He always found me. Then the notes started. Folded scraps of paper left on my desk or tucked into my notebook when I wasn't looking. They weren't threatening at first, not explicitly, but they were unnerving. "I notice you, and I remember what you say. You can't hide from me. I'm always around." I brought them to the principal, but he brushed it off, saying substitute teachers are just trying to connect with students, so don't make a big deal out of it. By the middle of the week, I realized he wasn't connecting. He was literally obsessed. Thursday morning, the situation hit a breaking point. Mr. Cross was assigned to cover chemistry lab. I usually enjoyed labs, but that day I was on edge. As I measured out a solution, I kept catching glimpses of him, standing just inside the doorway watching me. Not supervising or assisting, just watching me. His lips were pressed together in that same tight line, eyes tracking my movements. I tried to shake it off and focus, but the sensation of being studied and followed was impossible to ignore. Every time I moved, he moved slightly, always keeping me in view. Then during a lab experiment, a small chemical spill happened near the edge of the workstation. I jumped back instinctively, and Mr. Cross reacted too. Too quickly. He grabbed the container I hadn't even touched, holding it as if he'd been waiting for that exact moment. "Careful," he said, softly. "We wouldn't want anyone to get hurt, would we?" Something in that sentence sent a shiver down my spine. He wasn't warning me, he was demonstrating control. By lunchtime, whispers had started circulating. Some students noticed the way he'd followed me from room to room. A few claimed he was taking notes on a small pad, scribbling furiously. I stayed silent, terrified it would make things worse. It wasn't until third period that the lockdown began. I was doing my work when the intercom came on and told the school that we were in a lockdown. The room erupted in panic, papers flew, and students hid. My teacher grabbed a heavy table and shoved it against the door while turning off the lights. The windows were curtained. We huddled in a corner, trying not to make a sound. The next thing I know, I heard Mr. Cross at the door knocking and yelling to open up for him. The teacher shushed us, signaling for complete silence. We didn't move, even though the knocks continued. The handle rattled as he tested the door. He wasn't trying to force it open yet, but he was letting us know he could. We stayed like that for what felt like hours. Eventually, faint sounds echoed from the hallway. Police, I think. Officers moving quickly, shouting for students to stay put. Then the handle rattled one last time before footsteps receded down the hall. The lockdown lasted nearly an hour. When the doors finally opened, SWAT teams and uniformed officers steamed in. Mr. Cross was nowhere to be found in the school. Outside, police cars lined the street, and students were escorted in groups to safety. Later, we found out he'd been arrested at a nearby motel. He had a vehicle full of surveillance equipment, binders filled with meticulous notes about students and staff, and a backpack containing tools the police refused to describe publicly. They said he had been planning to manipulate the lockdown to trap students in certain classrooms. Possibly just to observe them, or possibly for worse intentions. Nobody knew for sure. Even months later, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Mr. Cross is in prison now, but sometimes I think about how carefully he orchestrated everything, how he studied every student, every routine, every movement, and how he could have easily escalated the situation into something far more tragic. I never trusted substitutes again. Even a simple absence from a teacher makes me anxious now, and every new face carries the memory of that quiet, obsessive stare, the soft, patient voice, and the terrifying realization that someone who's supposed to be watching out for you could instead be watching you. I wanted to tell you guys about my mentally unstable neighbor who I will be calling Kay to respect her privacy. Because I don't want to call her crazy or anything else that contributes to the stigmatization of severe mental illness. This story isn't going to be exaggerated to be more creepy or anything like that. It's just what happened. We had just moved into our new home, which we had recently built in a town in Texas. It started when my parents began finding small pills strewn about our backyard near the fences, just a few here and there. We googled the numbers of the pills to find most of them were antidepressants, but I cannot remember the exact names as this was about a year or so ago. But I think there was at least one pill that Google said was an antipsychotic medication. We were pretty confused, but mostly worried about our dog eating them before we could find them. This kept happening over a few weeks, and then we found unopened water and Gatorade bottles thrown over our fence. The side of the house this was coming from had a somewhat empty lot next door. We had soon-to-be neighbors building their new house there, but it wasn't like the construction workers were throwing their trash over our fence. These bottles were unopened and full. For reference, Kay lives a few houses down from mine on the corner. Between our house and hers are two empty lots. The lot closest to us, with a new house being built there. After another week or so of this came the fights, or maybe incidents I should call them. Kay would routinely storm out of her house and go yell at the construction workers. I don't know what it's about, but apparently it's about nonsense things. Sometimes she would yell from her yard. Sometimes she would walk onto the lot to yell. Several times she was seen yelling at no one, just standing in the lot or walking around the construction supplies, and arguing to herself. By now, most of the people on our street knew of her and were afraid of her. Up to this point, I had never seen Kay. I attended university an hour away and was only home on the weekends. One weekend, my parents left me home alone in the middle of the day. I think they were at the gym or the grocery store. I'm an only child too. I had just gotten out of the shower and walked downstairs to hear yelling. I peek outside the windows to see a middle-aged blonde lady arguing. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but I could hear another male voice. Now, I had not met Kay yet, but I also hadn't met my new neighbors, but my parents had. So my first thought was that this was the new couple building next door. My new neighbors. It seemed like they were arguing about the house. After a few minutes, the blonde lady walks away, and then a couple comes out of the unfinished house, and they get into their car parked on the street. I'm really confused at this point, especially when the man walks over to my door and rings the doorbell. I'm very introverted, so I opted to not answer the door, which was kind of stupid, I know. My parents weren't home anyway, so it wouldn't have made a difference, I thought. After a minute, he walks back to his car, and from the window, I can see him sitting there on the driver's side, doing something. He comes back with a note that he leaves on my door, and then he and his wife drive away. After I'm sure they are gone, I get the note and read it. Apparently, my neighbors were checking out the house when they saw Kay, the blonde lady, attempting to get into my backyard. They confronted her, and that's what the yelling was. In a rush, I sent a pic of the note to my mom, called my mom, etc. She didn't seem that worried about it, but I knew that we always left the back door unlocked during the day. If she had gotten through our fence gates, she could have easily walked inside the house while I was home alone. After that, my stepdad got some new locks for the little gate doors at the front of our house. Things continued like this for a while, with Kay trying to get into our backyard, throwing pills and water bottles over our fence. A couple times, she was rummaging around our flower beds too. There was one instance that really unnerved my parents. We have a small alleyway that runs behind our house, connecting everyone's driveways. Another neighbor who lives across the alleyway from us contacted my parents to let them know they had been seeing Kay looming around her back fence gate at around 3 a.m. that night. Not sure why those neighbors were awake at that time, but they said Kay was just standing there in the middle of the alleyway, staring at our back fence. Knowing we had someone essentially casing out our house in the middle of the night was really starting to freak us out. The guy who built our house, who I'm naming Jay, somehow got in contact with someone who knew Kay's family pretty well. Everybody was wanting answers to why Kay was acting like this, and since Jay had built most of the houses in the area and was well connected, people were asking him. I think he was friends with the realtor who sold the house to Kay, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Jay was able to give us a lot of information about Kay. Apparently, her family was rich and owned a very big corporation, like one of the biggest in the US. I'm not naming it, again for her privacy, and her family had essentially placed her in this house away from the rest of them. They did not want to deal with her mental illness, but more importantly, 2 years ago, her only son died of a drug overdose, and she's been unstable ever since. The reason why she wants to get into our backyard and keeps throwing stuff over the fence is because she believes her son is there. Not sure if she thinks we're holding him hostage or his ghost is here or what, but that's why. She's been to several psychiatric hospitals throughout her life, and now she's stopped taking her medication because she's throwing it over our fence. Things finally came to a head in January 2020, when, during one of her usual arguments with the construction workers, she pulled out a BB gun. She was already very aggressive, so the BB gun just made things 100 times worse. I don't know if she just threatened to shoot them or actually did, but the cops were called regardless. It took them a while to talk her down, with several police officers swarming the street with big guns. I am thankful that my parents had been following police reports, so when they came, they knew about Kay's history of mental illness. I am both grateful and a little surprised that they handled the situation so well, because not a lot of police departments properly train their officers to deal with mentally ill patients, especially ones experiencing psychosis. I still have ring camera videos of the police officers with big rifles loitering around our front lawn while assessing the situation. I might post that for proof, but I'm not sure it's necessary. Anyway, after that incident, Kay was not seen for a long time. We hear she was in a psychiatric hospital for many months, after which she returned to our neighborhood. She's doing much better now. She no longer does any of the strange behavior she used to. Almost every day, I and my parents see her walk her dog past our house. She's clearly sticking to her routine, and I'm happy for her. This story dates back to about 1.5 years ago when my daughter was around 4 months old. Me being 26 female. I had just moved with my then significant other to a dangerous part of town, but the street we moved to wasn't too bad. Everyone knows their neighbors and everyone seems to get along. Well, since everyone in the neighborhood chats with each other, one of my neighbors warned my significant other and me about a homeless woman that parks her van on the street and harasses everyone who walks by her car, and to try and avoid her as best as possible. Side note, parking in this town is street parking only, no reserved parking spots. This will have a significance later. I thought, meh, that's one small downside to living here, along with the street parking. Not that big of a deal as long as I avoid her, right? So the next day after our neighbor's warning, after returning home from a long day at work and picking up my infant daughter, a homeless lady, really slender, meth head, wearing what appeared to be newish clothes, breath reeking of something foul, is walking up the left side of the sidewalk, screaming up a storm at these teenage kids who looked terrified. The teenagers aren't engaging her, they just keep walking and looking at each other with uncertainty. I stayed on the right side of the sidewalk, even though I knew I'd have to cross the small street to the left where my apartment was located. My daughter wakes up from her nap in my arms and begins to coo. A homeless lady spots me crossing the street with my purse, work bag, my baby, and her baby bag, and decides it's a good idea to come up and chat me up about her conspiracy theories as I'm walking up to my apartment. Fine, no big deal. At least she's not bothering the kids anymore. Then, as I'm fumbling to get my keys to open the gate that leads to my complex, she asked me for money. I told her the truth. I'm sorry, but I don't carry cash on me. All the while trying to hold on to my baby, find my keys, and hold all my bags. Her response: "Stuck up, bitch." Then she continues muttering under her breath, which I must repeat was rank, and starts harassing more kids down the block. A couple months go by and she continuously comes up to harass me, as if she doesn't recall who I am every single day. Every day I politely apologize and say I need to get home, or I don't have any money still, or I simply don't have time to chat right now. Every answer I gave her was met with an insult, both directly and under her breath. At this point, I am still not concerned. I've always had a soft spot for the homeless, and I'm aware that this lady has severe mental illness. I always apologize for not having money to give, even though the insults. One night around midnight, my daughter wakes up crying horribly. My significant other and I take her temperature, 103 fever. I tell him it's time to take her to the emergency room, immediately before it gets worse. We gather everything up, and I gently take her from bed and lay her against my chest. She's so helpless, weak, burning hot, and whimpering terribly. I still want to tear up thinking about it to this day. So as we walk out of the apartment, my SO says he will run down 3 blocks to grab the car. Remember, it's all street parking, so we often had to park blocks away. I say, okay, I'll stand in front of the apartment so he can just pick us up and we can book it to the ER. Wrong choice. I watch as he ran all the way down the street and turned the corner out of sight. Then I look back at my baby and start rocking and shearing her so that maybe she could get a little bit of sleep or rest before being up at the hospital all night. Moments later, when I look up, the homeless lady walks around the same corner that my SO just ran around and makes a beeline straight toward me. I get a little uneasy as I have a sick baby in my hands, but maybe she'll leave me alone this time, right? That was wishful thinking to the max. The homeless lady, in a voice loud enough to wake up the entire block: "Oh, hey there, sis. Daddy just told me that the baby's done being sick and needs a healer." Me, still trying to gently rock my baby as she's startled back awake and wondering why the hell he told this lady about the baby being sick. What? Sorry? I said. "I'm a healer," she said. "My mama and I have been healers since birth. Give me the baby." Me, still trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, knowing she's mentally ill. "Sorry, I'm waiting on her dad to bring the car around so we can take her to the hospital. Can you keep your voice down? She's trying to sleep." "Nah, girl, I'm a healer. Didn't you hear me? I've already said I was a healer. You know what a healer is, don't you? Give me the baby." Now at this point, she reached out and put her incredibly dirty hands on my daughter's leg and foot, and wouldn't let go. "Excuse me, let her go now." "Give me the baby. She's very sick. You're waking her up. Stop." "You bitch, let me heal her." "If you don't let her go right now, I will kill you," I said. It was at this point that she and I locked eye contact, and her facial expression was what I can only describe as the most terrifying, evil look a person can give, with her eyes and smile widening with every passing second. The lady's face still haunts me. She then broke out in a laugh so loud and terrifying that I can't believe I didn't piss myself. By this time, my daughter was crying hysterically. My internal dialogue went something like this: "Damn, where the hell is my SO? I'm going to have to set my sick infant daughter on the ground and kick this lady's ass just to get her to not kidnap my kid." It also crossed my mind that if I did that, I'd probably be the one arrested. Like a Hail Mary, my SO comes around the corner in the car, and I reiterate to the lady that my SO is now here, and if she doesn't stop bothering me, I will kill her. This finally struck some chord inside her brain, and she took off running down the street, cursing profanities very loudly. My daughter's cry has me in tears too after being yanked so hard by this lady. I still wonder what would have happened if she yanked hard enough to take my sick daughter. My SO ended up admitting that he felt bad for her, so he told her that our baby was sick and even struck up a conversation with her about it. All the while, his daughter and I were waiting outside past midnight alone in a bad area for him. Needless to say, he's now my ex. He even later laughed about the entire thing and told me I was exaggerating and she was harmless. He also still struck up regular conversations with the woman after that anytime he'd see her, and it infuriated me. I don't think anyone who would have seen the look in this woman's face would label her as harmless. She looked very much like she was ready to do harm.